Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine live on Channels Television. I'm Layo Olaride. Today on the program we have the Indonesian Foreign Minister calling on her counterparts at the G20 summit to find ways to end the war. Also, Russian President Vladimir Putin saying the war could continue until the last Ukrainian is left standing. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling for multilateralism between nations to deal with this Russian invasion.
Here we are.
Well, let's kick off this morning. We begin with news from the ongoing G20 summit in Bali, where Indonesia's Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi is calling for the G20's action to find ways to move forward and end the war in Ukraine sooner rather than later. Well, she made this call during a speech at the opening ceremony of the meeting of foreign ministers. The build-up to the gathering on the Indonesian island of Bali has been dominated by the war and its impact on the global economy, with top officials from Western countries and Japan stressing it would not be business as usual at the forum. Those shouts of "when will you stop the war" and "why don't you stop the war" ahead as Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov shook hands with his Indonesian counterpart at the start of the meeting.
Here we are, sitting together for the first time to discuss important issues confronting all of us. I do hope that from the discussion, we will find ways to move forward. So multilateralism is also the only way to coordinate effectively against the global challenges. Therefore, let's try to do our best. And multilateralism will only deliver if there is trust among us. Our responsibility to end the war sooner than later and settle our differences at the negotiating table, not at the battlefield. G20 must be a beacon of solution to many global challenges, and only then G20 be relevant and benefit the world at large, not only its member. I hope this perspective will provide some enrichment to our discussion today.
Well, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has dismissed what he cast as the West's frenzied criticism of the war in Ukraine, and that was at the G20 summit. He's scolding Russia's rivals for scuppering a chance to tackle global economic issues. According to him, Western partners avoided following the mandate of the G20 from dealing with issues of the world economy during the discussions. He adds that the West's discussions strayed almost immediately as soon as they took the floor to the frenzied criticism of the Russian Federation in connection with the situation in Ukraine. Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin has issued a warning to the West and Ukraine, saying the war might drag on until the last Ukrainian is left standing. Speaking to parliamentary leaders, Mr. Putin said the prospects of any negotiation would grow dimmer the longer the conflict dragged on. Russia accuses the West of waging a proxy war against it by hammering its economy with sanctions and stepping up the supply of advanced weapons to Ukraine. But while boasting that Russia was just getting into its stride, Mr. Putin also referred to the possibility of negotiations. Well, this is the first reference to diplomacy in many weeks after repeated statements from Moscow that negotiations with Kyiv had totally broken down.
Several packages of anti-sanction measures were introduced in a short period of time, starting as early as the first days of March, in close contact with the government. Thanks to them, the consequences of the unfriendly, clearly hostile actions of Western countries have been minimized. Yes, of course, we understand and know this, we can see that the measures introduced, the legal measures against Russia, create difficulties for us. The so-called collective West, headed by the United States, have been behaving exceptionally aggressive towards Russia over the decades. If the West wanted to provoke a conflict in order to move on to a new stage of fighting with Russia, a new stage of containment of our country, then we can say that it has succeeded to a certain extent. The war has been unleashed, the sanctions have been introduced. It would probably be hard to do in normal conditions, but there's something I would like to point out. They should have understood that they have already lost since the very start of our special operation, because its start meant the radical break in the US-led world order. It is the beginning of the transition from liberal globalist American egocentrism to a truly multipolar world.
Well, reacting to this, Ukraine's chief negotiator, Mikhailo Podolyak, has dismissed Mr. Putin's comments, saying there is no collective West plan. According to him, everything else is a primitive propaganda. That's why Mr. Putin's mantra of the war to the last Ukrainian is yet another proof of deliberate genocide. The United Nations and the European Commission have held their first high-level dialogue at the Green Tree Foundation outside of New York City. The two-day high-level dialogue is co-chaired by the Secretary General and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The delegations are discussing the war in Ukraine and its global consequences, including efforts to alleviate the impact, especially on the most vulnerable and on food, energy and the finance sectors. Well, at this meeting, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for multilateralism between nations and blocs around the world to deal with ongoing issues, including climate change and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, it appears Kyiv has lost one of its main international supporters after British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he would step down as the Conservative Party leader. Ukrainian President Zelensky, in his usual nightly address, says the country expects Britain's support to continue despite that, and he thanked Mr. Johnson for defending Ukraine's interests. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba describes the British Prime Minister as a true friend of Ukraine for being among the first world leaders to unequivocally condemn the invasion and also to help Ukraine defend itself and ultimately win the war in the future.
В нашій країні стала британська тема.
The British topic, Boris Johnson's decision to leave the post of party chairman and prime minister, has been the main topic in our country. In the afternoon, I spoke with him and thanked him for the support we have received since the first day of the Russian terror. First of all, it is about weapons, air defense systems, Stingers, cool anti-tank systems, and also artillery, ammunition, armored vehicles, and many other things. Strong political support, strong sanctions against Russia, financial aid to our states. Only for security and defense needs, more than £2 billion have been allocated since February 24. Britain's role in protecting freedom is truly global, and although it's a reflection of the position of British society, the leadership and charisma of the state's leaders are always of particular importance, especially during these times. The times of Russia's full-scale anti-European war, which launched its attack on Europe from our states. So it is not surprising that Ukrainians feel personal gratitude to Boris. I have informed the senators about the frontline situation and what the occupiers were preparing for. In particular, it was about Donbass, about the south of our country. about the Kharkiv region. The Russian army hit Kramatorsk again with missiles. The occupiers also hit Kharkiv, the city of Donbas.
Там встановлений наш національний прапор. 2 місяці
Well, this week we have been speaking to some Nigerian students who have been affected one way or another by Nigeria's decision to reject Ukraine online degrees. At this time, we want to get another perspective to this story, the situation of many students who have fled the war in South Africa, what the situation is with these students who've returned, the future of their academics, and how the South African government, might be assisting them. Well, joining us is our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Debia, for more discussions on it. Hello, Betty. Good to see you this morning. Betty, if you can hear me, let's just delve right into it. What is South Africa's policy, in terms of these students that were affected by the war in Ukraine?
Hello, Layo. You froze for a bit there. I didn't really get the question.
So I was asking about South Africa's policy concerning the students that, have returned since February, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What is the policy in terms of these students?
Well, Layo, you have over 50 students here, most of them medical students, and quite a number of them, their fate is in limbo. One, you have the academic year in Ukraine, like in Nigeria, being from September to June. Here you have January, February to the end of the year. So that's another issue. And then still sticking to, let me speak about the medical students in particular, because I know the Nigerian government spoke about, or the Health Council, I don't know what that is called in Nigeria, spoke about the medical students learning online. So here, I can say that there have been consultations. They're mostly still in limbo, especially the medical students. Those are the ones I'm talking about. You've had consultations between the Department of Higher Education and Technology. You have the Health Care Professionals Council South Africa and Universities South Africa called USAF, and Deans of Medical School. So they raised some issue. Speaking of the University South Africa, for example, the chief executive, Professor Ahmed Bawa, was talking about some of the challenges. They have to find a way to marry or see where the curriculum on both sides, meet, or if they match, and what to do about that. Those are the challenges. You have the issue of the program details that they have in Ukraine, comparing it to what they have in South Africa, and the students' performance data. These are things that may take time. In the early year students, placing them in the universities, there's already a long waiting list, especially medical school here. And so many are still waiting to be placed. And having these other students from Ukraine having to find a place, it's an issue they're still trying to resolve. The Department of Higher Education and Technology, they haven't said much categorically. We don't really know. I reached out to one of the officials of that department for some days, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who hasn't been successful. He didn't quite reply. He didn't answer the questions that I sent. I called, the calls were not picked. So. And then there's also the policy, the Healthcare Professionals Council. For you to get certification here, you have to have done at least 50% of your study in the system here in South Africa. So that's an issue that they have to sort out as well. For the clinical students, those are at the high level of medical school. Some have managed to get clinical rotations here in the medical school. Others are learning online at the levels where they are, because they were given placement letters, clinical placement letters by their schools. So that is going on now. The issue of certification, we don't even know how that will be resolved. The students affected have coordinated themselves, trying to, offer solutions to government, saying probably the model may be for the universities here to be obliged to just take a few. Is who now will be picked that will be the problem at the various levels. They've co-signed a letter that they sent to the Department of Higher Education and Technology. I don't think they've been answered. That was in May. And there's some meetings that are still going on as at June. So they're still in limbo mostly. There's no clear policy yet that has been spelled out, regarding what to do about them. That's where they are now.
It's quite unfortunate that, like you said, their fate is still in limbo. We do hope it is resolved quickly and they're able to, get back to their studies immediately. But, in the immediate aftermath of this war, some of the students went back home. But do you know if, there are some who are still outside the country at the moment?
I'm not quite sure because many of them came back, but probably those who can afford would have found placement in some other European countries close by, probably Poland and the like. But I don't have specific details about that. I know that those who came back were saying, look, we're from working class families. It's quite expensive, even in those other countries compared to Ukraine. And then them having to pay here as well. So I can't tell you categorically that there are those who are still out there, but they may have, if their families can afford, moved on to countries close by to study. But quite a number of them, over 50, returned in March when they were evacuated from the country, from Ukraine.
Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, still to come on the program, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says additional aid from the United States would be helpful to win the war. Join us again. Welcome back to the program. Britain's Defence Minister Ben Wallace says there's no risk at all of the UK's support of Ukraine being impacted by the current political crisis that's engulfing the government in Westminster. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who earlier announced that he would quit, said he had assured Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that he will continue to work with partners to end the blockade on grains in the coming weeks. President Zelensky's office has issued a statement since Johnson confirmed his resignation, saying that Ukraine had no doubt that Britain's support will remain even after incumbent Prime Minister leaves office.
Is there a risk that the political quagmire in Westminster at the moment will impact on the UK's support to Ukraine?
I don't think there's a risk at all. I mean, I have strived throughout this process to build a cross-party consensus on Ukraine, and I've been very lucky that I've been supported by everyone from the SNP, the Labour Party, the leader of the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats in our policy towards Ukraine, and I think that is going from strength to strength. There's not a week that goes by where I either don't reach out to them or talk to those parties, but also that we agree that it is important to continue the effort to support Ukraine as it strives to defend itself from this awful illegal invasion. Well, I think he knows, because he's been visited by a range of parliamentarians, as has my counterpart, the Defence Minister, that Britain is full square behind them. And, the assistance to Ukraine we give is not just one person, not me, not the Prime Minister. It's the whole effort. Actions matter in all of this. And, while the Prime Minister will be incredibly sad to leave this post, he has led from the front on Ukraine, as he had on COVID and obviously Brexit. And I think that isn't lost on many people. But the whole of the political system is supportive of what we're doing in Ukraine. I don't expect that to finish.
All right, let's jump on our second discussion of the program. We have joining us Yinka Oyeniji, an attorney and an international affairs analyst. Thank you so much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you too for having me.
Well, I want to ask about your reading, about your reading of the latest developments in Ukraine. But before we move to that, let's just continue from where that last track stopped. Ben Wallace saying he doesn't think there's a risk to, the political crisis in UK affecting what is happening in Ukraine, affecting the UK's aid to Ukraine. What is your take on that?
I think that is an unspoken rule that the rest of the West is queuing up behind. The United Kingdom has led from the front, not only for that part of Europe, but for the rest of Europe regarding how Ukraine should be supported in this debacle that's been going on for months, okay? So direct military attacks on Russia, everybody knows that Ukraine is being fortified time and again to ensure that they can resist the invasion by Russia. So whoever the prime minister is in the United Kingdom does not matter. Boris Johnson even was able to ride on the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine to stay this long in government. So whoever is going to take over from Boris Johnson will just take it from where it's not even stopping. So it's a continuous exercise until somebody backs down. And the rest of the West is pretty sure that Vladimir Putin will be the first to blink.
Well, Vladimir Putin has said he would not stop until, the last Ukrainian is standing. Do you really think Mr. Putin will be the first to blink?
It's grandstanding. There's nothing else to say to that. It's grandstanding. He tries to make it appear as if Russia's invasion is legitimate, is legal, but it's not. It's been long-standing. I mean, this issue has been on since the 50s. Putin himself has used it to distract his people from even calling for a change of government in that part of the world. So how much longer can he carry it? He continues to threaten, he undertakes nuclear drills and all of that, but he's suffering severe economic sanctions. I mean, I just read that Russia is alleged to have stolen a vessel load of grain from Ukraine. So he's suffering. Russia is suffering. The economy is suffering. He's merely grabbing at straws. And even though he continues to threaten and all of that, he should possibly pay attention to the local politics in Russia and be sure that he himself is not ousted within the few months ahead. So will he blink? Even if Vladimir Putin will not be the one to throw in the towel, the next president of Russia may very well be placed to say enough of this madness. Already, Finland and Sweden have become members of NATO. That has been that's pending ratification. So, I mean, it's Russia that will probably be boxed in that region. So, whether it be Vladimir Putin or not, the president of Russia, whoever that might be, in the coming months or years ahead, would recognize that this is a failed mission.
Well, let's talk about Ukraine now. What should be Ukraine's next line of action? We have the president asking, for more aid from the United States, saying that is how they will win the war. But with all the aids that have been coming in from UK, from France, Germany, and even the US is the biggest spender on Ukraine at this time. How can Ukraine, use this to really win the war? Is it by more aid? What you have at this point?
So the question is, what do we qualify as a win? For me, as long as Russia is not able to annex the rest of Ukraine itself, it's not a win for Russia. So the question is, what is the win for Ukraine? And Ukraine has done very well so far. It's resisted, it's reclaimed the Snake Island. It's been able to hold on to cities that are very, very important. It's even managed to shoot down missiles from Russia, shoot down planes. Russia is counting losses. And there are the rumors, everybody using the media to try to tilt the results to suit themselves. So as it is, as of today, Ukraine is still standing. And as long as they continue to resist Russia from taking more cities, as long as they continue to reclaim cities, and as long as they continue to put these weapons of warfare into use to resist Russia, Ukraine is winning. So it's a question of how many more people will join to support Ukraine. I just saw that Lithuania just sent in some millions of pounds to Ukraine. So Ukraine has the support of the West. everybody needs to support Ukraine. Macron needs to remain in government. Even the prime minister that will take over from Boris Johnson needs to do that. Joe Biden in the United States needs to do that, okay? Even Japan needs to sustain its own support, even though our thoughts are with Japan at this time. The former prime minister, Shinzo Abe, has just been gunned down. He's fighting for his life. But the rest of the world understands that in this battle, okay, for power, for economic powers in the world, it makes a whole world of sense to support Ukraine. Even China cannot wholeheartedly or boldly come out and say that it will align with Russia, even as Vietnam is also getting support already in anticipation of any invasion that may come from China. So the whole world stands with Ukraine, and Ukraine is buoyed and encouraged. The last thing that Boris Johnson did before he announced his resignation was to put a call to Zelensky again and say, we love you, we stand with you, and we believe in your stance. So Ukraine is very well placed to enjoy the support from the rest of the world.
All right, let's look at the legal aspect of this war. Speaking about war crimes now, early last month, we had the Ukrainian prosecutor that documented more than 14,000 Russian war crimes that were identified, more than 600 suspects, and they've initiated proceedings, trials that have taken place and sentenced some Russian soldiers. But as an attorney, what do you think? What would justice for war crimes in Ukraine look like? I mean, the war is ongoing, and many other how would I put it now? There are so many war crimes, so to speak, that the Russian soldiers are still allegedly perpetrating. So what would justice be like for war crimes, in Ukraine?
So two things, okay. Justice, first of all, the whole world is already discussing rebuilding Mariupol, okay, and the costs are put at some billion pounds right there to rebuild Mariupol. So everybody also has that in our sights, okay. And this is something that other countries of the world should be looking at. The cost of rebuilding Ukraine itself, not just Mariupol, is a lot. Because justice will mean that we start to anticipate how much will be required to attempt to restore Ukraine. When you have matters such as this, I mean, after the Nigerian Civil War, we had the 3 hours by Gowon, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconciliation. So those are the things that will bring about justice for Ukraine. How do we rebuild Ukraine? And the rest of the world will rise up to that. That's number one. Number two, international war crimes. The ICC is very well placed to try individuals. Now, you will understand there's a place of liability for the soldiers who are participating in this military warfare. Some of them who are doing so at the instructions of the president without having to take personal liabilities. Some have even crossed lines and said, our allegiance is to Ukraine. So Vladimir Putin and his generals, they are liable to be brought before the International Criminal Court to answer for war crimes against Ukraine. And it's been done before, all right? We've had Charles Taylor of Liberia, who also didn't get away with things like this. So Vladimir Putin is in a fight for his life, whether as president or when he becomes former president of Russia. The same thing for the generals who are standing by him. So criminally, Vladimir Putin is liable, and the same thing for his generals and some of the soldiers who get captured. And then, of course, in the civil aspect, the rest of the world owes a responsibility to rebuild the cities of Ukraine and then restore people back to their homes.
All right, just finally, Mr. Oyeniji, it's been an interesting conversation. Well, there's no question about, the impact this war has had globally, and bringing it here to Africa, especially Nigeria. There's been a lot of ripple effects of this war on our country and even the African continent. But how can we help ourselves to not be so affected by this, Africa as a whole?
A very good question, and I'm sorry that I have to quickly jump in on that. So number one, there are actually benefits of this war that Africa is not yet considering, okay? The energy costs in the rest of the world, in Europe, has gone high. It's gone ballistic, okay? We have the natural resources to provide not only power, energy in Africa, but clean and renewable energy. This is a time that we should be thinking of those resources to harness them and then to get support and export. It is amazing that we don't think that we can export energy, okay? Russia, okay, supplies gas to the rest of Europe. The same thing for energy. So the energy prices in the United Kingdom have gone up, okay, because of these sanctions on Russia, and Russia saying we are going to cut off gas supply. Can Nigeria supply gas to the rest of the world? We have the capacity. The same thing for renewable energy. So when the war is going on, there are people benefiting. Grains, food, staples that get exported in between the EU countries and even from Russia. Russia exports wheat. Those are the things that we can supply at this time as Africa to ensure that we take benefit of these things that don't happen all the time. Morocco and Mozambique, per United Kingdom, billions of pounds earned by those African countries, laying underground cables all the way from Morocco, all the way from Mozambique to the United Kingdom to power such European powers and the West. This is what we should be thinking about as Nigeria, as Africa. What natural resources do we have that we can harness to generate energy, not only for local consumption, but also for foreign export? That's number one. Number two, we have students who have been dislodged from Ukraine. Some countries of the West have put in place schemes that they welcome them to say you can adopt a family, you can adopt an Ukrainian, and then you get this much by doing that. The Nigerian students who were in Ukraine, what plans do we have in place for them? We can't even bring them to our local universities, knowing that ASU has been on strike for a very long time. China is another likely country that will suffer liabilities from this Ukrainian war, because China and Russia have close economic ties. So it means that even Russia and China may be displaced. If we have any country in Africa that is harnessing economic potentials, Putin put it out there and said, you cannot buy from us except you use our currency. That's something we should start thinking about. Can we insist that oil in Nigeria will be bought using the naira? Is there a possibility of even putting that out there? And I'll round up with this. We go towards the elections in 2023, okay? Do we make some of these things electoral issues? Because if Russia knew that a certain Putin would drag it into an unnecessary war, then I don't think they would have allowed him to be president. Are we sure that we are queuing up behind a presidential candidate that would know how to harness benefits, that would have sound foreign trade policies, that would understand international economics and international politics? Can we find that presidential candidate so that we'll queue behind not one person that will bring further famine and hunger, but somebody who would ensure that we harness the benefits of international politics? There's absolutely no reason that Nigeria should not be on the UN Security Council. Thank you.
All right, then. Thank you so much, International Affairs Analyst Yinka Oyeniji. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Well, we'll move on to other stories. 3 people have been killed and another 5 were wounded after Russian forces fired rockets at a district in the northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. Well, the regional governor says 2 of the victims had gone out to feed local cats when they were killed. Russian forces have captured large swaths of the country, including completely seizing the eastern region of Luhansk last Sunday, but their progress is said to have been far slower than many analysts predicted, and they were being beaten back in initial attempts to take the capital, Kyiv, and the second city, Kharkiv. Well, in other developments, at least 1 person has also been killed and several wounded in a Russian airstrike on the heart of the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk. Local authorities say the missile damaged 6 buildings, including a hotel and an apartment block in the large industrial hub. The nearby city of Sloviansk, also in the Donetsk region, came under fire, with Mayor Vadim Lak saying there had been casualties, but he gave no further details on that. Well, Russia, which invaded Ukraine on February 24, has not commented on that situation in Kramatorsk or in Sloviansk, and it denies deliberately targeting civilians. After effectively establishing control of the neighboring Luhansk region, Moscow has made clear it is planning to capture parts of the Donetsk region that its forces have not yet seized. Or Ukrainian officials have said they expect Kramatorsk and Sloviansk to become the next focus of Russia's offensive. Well, despite all that is happening, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is sending a message of hope to his followers and the citizens. Well, Zelensky, speaking in barely a whisper in video message issued on Instagram, said he wanted to share his thoughts at 1 minute to midnight after the 134th day of the war. Ukraine and its allies say Russia launched an imperial-style land grab with February's invasion, starting the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II, which has killed thousands and displaced millions and flattened cities. Well, Russia denies targeting civilians in what it calls a special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine, root out dangerous nationalists, and protect Russian speakers. U.S. Senator Rick Scott has said during a visit to Taiwan that he believes the world has changed following Russian President Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine, and is affirming U.S. efforts to defend the freedom in what he says to defend the freedom we all believe in. Well, Mr. Scott's comments came after the Eastern Theater commander of the People's Liberation Army released a statement saying that China's military recently held multi-unit joint combat readiness exercises, patrols and combat drills in the sea and airspace around Taiwan. RIMPAC is billed as the world's largest international maritime exercise, with the latest one kicking off late last month, with 26 nations participating in drills around Hawaii and Southern California.
We all realize when we watch what Putin did in Ukraine that the world has changed. We all have to put ourselves in a position that we can make sure we defend the freedom we all believe in. And I think it's important that while each of Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea care about their own security, that the United States and all freedom-loving countries across the world do everything we can to help. I think what Taiwan has to do, Japan has to do, South Korea has to do, they have to continue to build interoperability with those they think will work with them to defend their freedom. They've got to continue to do more drills to make sure they're ready in case Communist China does, or Russia or anyone else does the wrong thing. So I'm going to do everything I can to be helpful.
Very nice. That's why we call it hacking guest house. That's great.
We'll take a break now on the program. When we come back, a Ukrainian circus group of artists are seeking refuge in France, and they're raising awareness about the war. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. The Netherlands has met a goal of ending its dependence on Russian gas. Its energy minister made this known, saying that's Energy Minister Rob Jetten made this known in an interview. But as a major storage and transport hub, the Netherlands is exposed to any wider European gas crisis. Well, this reduction is enough to replace the Dutch share of Russian gas, 15 to 20% of imports in recent years, as the Netherlands' domestic production has wound down. The size of the Netherlands' Groningen field meant the country is for years a major supply of natural gas to Europe, and the field could still be called upon to help neighboring countries in the event of a complete cutoff in Russian supplies that could endanger life. So let's take a listen now to Energy Minister Rob Jetten.
Well, for the national situation in the Netherlands, we've seen huge energy savings in the first 6 months of this year, cutting gas uses by almost 33%. We're doing a lot extra work to make sure that our gas storages are filled, and we are increasing our capacity to import liquid gas from other parts of the world. But if Russia cuts its supplies in the short term, and it would affect countries such as Germany, it would also affect the Netherlands. So we will face a European issue, a European crisis, if the Russian gas supply drops on a very short term. Well, I think everyone realizes that this is not a national crisis, but a European crisis. So we all have to get rid of our Russian dependency as soon as possible. And we all have to take difficult measures to cut our gas uses and make sure that we are well prepared for next winter. And in an extreme situation with safety issues, we can consider extreme measures such as Groningen, but at this time there is a lot of other things to do. At the moment, the average is 56% for all Dutch gas storages, and we're working hard to make sure that it gets filled up to at least 80% before the start of next winter.
Well, our business correspondent, Laddie Williams, is here for our usual business discussions. Hello, Laddie.
Hello.
Well, we've had the G20s, the G7 summit.
Right.
We've had the NATO summit. Now we're in the G20 summit happening in Bali.
Right.
All these meetings have been dominated by Russia's war in Ukraine. I mean, that is what is ongoing in the world.
That's all we're discussing these days. And it's the same thing that's going to happen with the G20 meeting. We've seen, the top nations and developing nations meet at this point in Bali, and they're going to be discussing how to, surmount the challenges we're having, with the war in Ukraine. We're having food insecurity challenges, the energy crisis that's raging on with Europe, trying to wean off, Russian gas and having to make difficult decisions, at this point, looking at dirtier alternatives, for their electricity needs. And we're seeing the recession fears already globally, and that too in the Eurozone region. So at the end of the day, this is what's going to dominate discussions at G20. And we've seen the US and its allies, talk about boycotting this meeting so that Russia, can be left out. But we see Indonesia is trying to be as neutral as possible.
Yes.
To make sure that everybody's needs, are met, and all the discussions, how to move forward from this war, how to secure energy, globally. That's basically what's going to be discussions at G20.
At the G20, well, the oil is dipping, and investors are worried about global recession. You mentioned that.
Exactly. We still have that energy crisis at this point. We're seeing, but it's good for oil prices to go down, even though, investors might not be too happy with that because they're making money from, the volatility we're seeing in that market. But at the end of the day, if we're going to reduce, energy costs, we need oil prices and gas prices to go down. At this point. And we're already seeing recession fears, help, push that in, bring down the price, below $100. Some analysts are saying it might go even lower, than $100, about $65 per barrel. But at the end of the day, there's still supply issues. So it's like, supply issues dragging you here, and we have recession fears, dragging the markets on the other side. So some investors are still, profiting from the volatility that we're seeing in that market. But at the end of the day, we need those prices to actually come down so that, we can see energy costs come down in most of these countries. We're already seeing like countries like Sri Lanka begging, Russia to help them with fuel at this point. So it's a difficult situation for most countries with rising energy costs, and the volatility actually continues in that market as far as we know.
Well, aside oil, how are other markets faring?
Other markets are not looking bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I was expecting a sell-off, yesterday and into today, which we've seen for the past couple of weeks. But apparently we're seeing investors, get back into, most of these risky markets. But some analysts believe these are bear market rallies that, will be short-lived, but some are also saying we might have hit the bottom. But at the end of the day, we still have the economic headwinds globally, and we might still see some, volatility with this market. We're expecting U.S. job reports today that's for June.
Okay.
So that would also, push sentiment in the market. We're seeing the Dow Jones Industrial Average Futures, the S&P 500 futures. They're looking red this morning, although they closed, the main markets closed green yesterday. We're seeing Bitcoin, holding above $20,000, actually touching $22,000 this morning, and we're seeing, the extreme fear, moving in that market. So it's looking good, but there's still cautious optimism because the war is still on, inflation is still rising, central bankers are still tightening. So we just have to watch and see at this point. But it's looking good in the markets.
All right, thank you. Ladi Williams, our business correspondent. Well, to sports now. The Russian Ministry of Sports and Tourism Ministry of Belarus have reportedly signed 3 cooperation agreements. According to the Belarus state-owned national news agency Belta, Russian Sports Minister Oleg Matisyn says one document focuses on actions against doping and another is centered on outlining the plan for sports events. The final one refers to the 2 countries' clubs and university teams cooperating. A resolution of a joint collegium of the 2 ministers was also agreed, with meetings also moving on to production of equipment. Both nations have been largely excluded from international sport following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Belarusian support for Ukraine. Oh, this is inside a packed circus tent in central France. Ukraine acrobat Anastasia Mazu delights the crowd with her balletic routine from a suspended ring. Well, she fled her homeland weeks after Russia invaded. One of nearly a dozen acrobats, clowns, jugglers, and contortionists who responded to a French theater's director's offer of refuge and the chance to put on a show to be able to raise awareness of the Ukraine war. Well, the newly formed troupe has called itself Zirka, meaning star in Ukraine. Some left their loved ones behind in Ukraine. Others arrived with their children and belongings that they could carry. Well, the show is an exhibition of hope and freedom, according to the organizers. Well, in some acts, the performers wear military-style camouflage fatigues and drape themselves in their national flag. Well, it's all about keeping hope alive. That's it on the program today and for the week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.